welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. In my reading roundup videos, I talk about the books that I've been reading recently, and I've got a nice stack in front of me, and this time it's quite varied. I often read, just mysteries, although I do really love historical fiction. I do like to read nonfiction when I can, and so this time around there's a nice variety in the books that I've been reading recently. So first up, I found this at the library. This is called Great Novels, the World's Most Remarkable Fiction Explored and Explained. And this was just really fun to go through. It goes by date, and so it starts with before 1800. And in that section they talk about Don Quixote and Robinson Crusoe, and then 1800 to 1870, and they talk about Pride and Prejudice and Frankenstein and Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and Moby Dick and Great Expectations and Crime and Punishment, and 1870 to 1920, and some highlights from there: Middlemarch, Anna Karenina, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, although I did not like that book at all. 1920 to 1950. That one was interesting because the ones that they chose to highlight for that were the ones that I've read I didn't really like either. So The Great Gatsby, for example. And I've never read them, but I have no real interest in reading Ernest Hemingway or Virginia Woolf or William Faulkner. And then 1950 to 1980, and in there is To Kill a Mockingbird and One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, and then 1980 to present. So yeah, it was really interesting to read through, and I really liked the setup. So here's an example for the page for Don Quixote. There's a description of the book and why it's important, with interesting little side notes. This one continues on into the next 2 pages. So yeah, this was a fun read through. I really enjoyed looking at that. And then for Christie Fest, I read The Pale Horse by Agatha Christie. I had a great time talking about this with the others on Discord when we talked about it for Christie Fest. I'm not going to talk about it here. I'm going to save it for when I get to it in my Agatha Christie read-through, just to say that this is a standalone, and I think a really underrated Agatha Christie. It was a really great book, a very complex mystery, and I really, really enjoyed it. Okay, and then I finished a buddy read that has been going on 4 months, and that's because there were times when both of us had to put it down for a while, but one of my subscribers, Anita, and we read When Christ and His Saints Slept by Sharon K. Penman, and I loved this. It was so good. It's a monster of a book, but I really, really enjoyed it. It's basically, it's a book about the anarchy. It's about the time of the wars between Stephen and Maud in England. So Henry I was Maud's father. He was the king, and he lost his son, and when he was close to death, he said that he wanted his daughter Maud to become the queen, and he got all of his barons and the rich landowners to say that they would support her as queen. But then when he died, she was over in Normandy, and her cousin Stephen was in England, and he raced for Winchester and got himself crowned as king. So he basically betrayed her, because he was one of the people who told her father that he would support Maud as the queen. And then what happened then was almost 20 years of war between Stephen and Maud for the throne. And it's such a fascinating piece of history. And in this historical fiction, Sharon K. Penman did such a good job of bringing history to life. I was fascinated she did a really good job of writing the characters in a way that I really cared about them, one way or the other, if I liked them or not. And yeah, I just thought she did such a good job, and I definitely want to read more from her. So there's this great map at the beginning, which is key because at the time, England owned land over in France, in Europe, and so that helps you understand why Maud wasn't in England, for example. And I also loved that throughout she included snippets from chronicles of the time. And here's one, and this is where she gets her title from. Never before had there been greater wretchedness in the country, and they said openly that Christ and his saints slept. So one fascinating thing about this fight for the throne is that in all of the years that they were fighting, the average citizen of England was completely forgotten about, and their lives were hell during that time. Their towns and cities were being sieged and sacked, and crops were burnt at different time periods. It was really hard for them. And I would imagine for the average person that they didn't care anymore who was on the throne. They just wanted someone to do it and to do a better job than Stephen was at the time, because he spent more time fighting Maud than actually being a good king. All right, and then a couple other things. Here's another chronicle from the Gesta Stephani Chronicle. So when the bishop and the Countess of Anjou had jointly made a pact of peace and concord, the bishop came to meet her in cordial fashion and admitted her into the city of Winchester, and after handing over to her disposal the king's castle and the royal crown, which she had always most eagerly desired, and the treasure the king had left there, though it was very scanty, he bade the people at a public meeting in the marketplace of the town salute her as their lady and their queen. So one fascinating thing too about the time period was how often people changed loyalties. There was a lot of betrayal going on and switching of loyalties, which meant for the people in that area or town, it depended on their, the landowner. If he changed loyalties, then they were expected to as well. So yeah, for the average person, this wasn't a great time period. And here's a section which was great. And there in the December darkness on this snow-clouded silent hill, she, Maud, beheld a glimmer of illuminating light, the realization that such loyalty could only be earned, not commanded, no matter who claimed England's crown. So there was so much in here too about loyalty and how is loyalty simply expected because you have the crown, and this was a good realization for Maud that it had to be earned. It didn't matter if you had the crown or not. You still had to earn that loyalty from the people. A young Thomas Becket makes an appearance in this story, which I found fascinating, considering that we know the next king was Henry II, Maud's son, and the famous historical event between Henry II and Thomas à Becket when he was the Archbishop of Canterbury. And then, of course, the king famously, supposedly saying, "Will no one rid me of this contentious priest?" And then Thomas gets murdered. That's a really interesting time in history as well. And so it was interesting to see a young Thomas Becket in here. And also, there's certain events in the book that happen in Shrewsbury, which is Shrewsbury Abbey is where Ellis Peters sets her Brother Cadfael series, which is interestingly set during this time period. So that was really fun to make those connections as I read this book. And then this was just thrown in, and I honestly think that this was a nod to Ellis Peters. I've told you from the first that you need to have that wound tended by a doctor. There is one in Shrewsbury. Also, a monk at their abbey said to be skilled in the use of healing herbs. Which is totally Brother Cadfael. So yeah. Anyway, I loved this read and I really enjoyed buddy reading with Anita. We had some really interesting conversations about this book. And then another buddy read that I did in a much shorter period of time was The Little Minister by J.M. Barrie. I buddy read this with Faith from Faith and Books, and we also had a great time buddy reading this together. We had some great conversations about this. This was written in 1891, and it's set in Scotland in a weaving village. And yeah, this was an interesting... I ended up really enjoying this, but it was an interesting read. The writing was beautiful. I did really love that. Here's an example from very, very early in the book. Our life is a book to which we add daily until suddenly we are finished, and then the manuscript is burned. In this diary, we set out meaning to write one story and write another. To turn back to the beginning is only to wonder and to be sad, but to compare the second half of the volume as it is with what we vowed to make it is to be lashed with nettles. So this story is told in the first person by a narrator, and that narrator is telling the story of Gavin Dishart, who is the new, very young minister in their village of Thrums. So he comes with his mom, he's 21. He comes with his widowed mother to take up this new position as the pastor at this church. I just really enjoyed this. It was written in 1891, but it took place earlier in the 1800s, and I didn't really anticipate where this story was going. It starts out very slow moving, which is actually good because I needed time to get used to the dialect. He writes the dialect, the Scottish dialect in here, which was a little hard to get used to, but I did like it. And then, and so the story is very slow paced, and Gavin meets this kind of mysterious woman, and everyone in the village thinks that she's a traveler, and but there's a lot of mystery surrounding her and where she comes from, and so there's a love story in here, and then like kind of halfway through, the pace picks up and it just charges towards the end, where at the end of the book, like everything is happening. There's a major flood and everything happens all at once. So the pacing was interesting, but I really did end up enjoying the story a lot. I really liked the narrator and his voice and how he chose to tell this story. And the people in the village were great. I loved all the characters. And so yeah, I really did enjoy this read, and I really did enjoy the buddy reading experience with Faith. Okay, and then I read Murder Before Evensong by the Reverend Richard Coles. This is the first Canon Clement mystery, and this one was funny because it's basically just a cozy mystery where the main character is the rector at the Church of England church in Champton, and a man is found dead in the church, and the police get involved with the investigation, and then of course Daniel is there and involved because it happens in his church. What's funny about this is near the beginning, I got so wrapped up in trying to figure out what time period this book was set that it completely detracted from the mystery for me, because there's no indication at first that it's not set right now. This book came out in 2022, I think. And so I was expecting it to be 2022. And then we get this conversation between Daniel and his mother, And she talks about him being born during the Battle of Britain, and that he was 5 years old when the war ended. So then I was like, how old is Daniel, and how old is his mother? And so then, then I was getting all distracted by that. And then a few pages later, we're told that Daniel's mother is entering her 70s, so she's in her early 70s. And so then I was like, what is going on? So then I finally realized that it's set in the 80s. And so I don't know why there was no indication that that's when it was. And there were things slipped in as you read that you knew that it was from the 80s. But it seems to me that the author should have just said flat out at the beginning that it was in the 80s, because I found it really distracting. Anyways, aside from that, the mystery was okay. You know, this one didn't blow me away or anything. I did love the village aspect of it. And it started out really well. And I loved this map of the village at the beginning. And it started out really well because he's preaching, and in the middle of his sermon, he says, as Moses struck the rock of Meribah, and lo, a crystal stream poured forth, we too must allow new waters to flow, or rather to flush. My dear people, we need to install a lavatory. I just thought it was hilarious that he chose to say that in the middle of his sermon. But the kerfuffle that ensues when he says that they need to install a lavatory. I mean, I get this. My dad was a pastor, and I get how all those things that seem really little can blow up and become major issues as people take sides about what you should do in a church. So yeah, that part was entertaining for sure. Okay. And then for the Follow Us to Fairacre read along that Kate Howe has been hosting, I read Emily Davis, and I joined her live show as we chatted about this book, which was really great. We had a really good discussion about this book, and I will link it in the description box below. This one, I really liked the format of how Miss Reed chose to share about the life of Emily Davis, and more importantly, her character. I really did enjoy this one as well. This one was published in the early 70s, I think. I really did enjoy that one. And then I read A Bride's Guide to Marriage and Murder by Dianne Freeman. This is the Countess of Harley historical mystery. This is, I believe it's the fifth one in the series. And I love this series. It's set in the Victorian time period, and Frances, the Countess of Harley, is an American who married a British aristocrat. He died. He was dead already in the first book of the series, and so she's a widow with a young daughter, and gets herself involved in mysteries. I love this series. I really enjoy the characters. I always enjoy the mystery. It's always very well done, with lots of people with motives, and then the investigation that she gets herself involved with, along with George Hazelton, who is someone who was a friend of her husband's, and so yeah, I really do enjoy this series. I don't want to say too much because this is the fifth one in, and this is a series that you really should read in order, but it's one of my favorite Victorian historical mystery series, and I really did enjoy this one as well. Okay, so there you have it. That's what I've been reading recently. Some mystery, a classic, historical fiction, non-fiction. I feel like there was a good variety in this stack. So let me know in the comment section If you've read any of these books, I would love to chat with you about them, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.